So can you read my mind? Why do some kids bully others? So you're gonna become a therapist. We usually have some mental health issues ourselves, are simply not ready to enter the job market. A master's degree is usually just a preparation for the actual doctorate. What do I actually do as a PhD student in psychology? Hello, I hope everyone's doing well. So today I am actually going to sit in front of a camera and talk for a long time while doing my makeup, so basically a get ready with me video. And I wanted to try it just so that I can talk more naturally instead of reading off from a script. And also, as I've mentioned in the last video, to create more value for the people who watch my videos. And the value today is basically debunking misconceptions or stereotypes about psychology PhD. And I thought this would be kind of informative or fun to talk about, because sometimes I do get a lot of kind of funny comments. They're not with bad intentions, but there are some assumptions about what I do whenever I say I'm doing a PhD in psychology that I feel like should be demystified. So today I'm just gonna talk through some of the most common ones. Feel free to skip to chapters you're more interested in, or just let it play while you do your dishes, or drive, or work out. This is not going to be super academic, and it's just going to be based on my personal experience and reflection. And also, if you've ever thought about doing psychology or a PhD in psychology, or a PhD in general, or you're just curious about what it's actually like, then this might be helpful. And if you yourself have heard of any similar stereotypes, you'll know that you're not alone. So let's get started. Clear the Pore Primer. The coverage is not great for my skin, but I've just been using it. I'm too lazy to switch. It's supposed to lighten your skin and balance out the skin tone. I usually start unconventionally by doing a base blush, so that later on the blush won't take off the concealer. This is Can Make number 16. 血色腮红. So the first assumption, the number one response I get when I tell people, especially lay people who have no exposure to psychology, that I'm doing a PhD in psychology, is that, so can you read my mind? 毛戈平 Luxury Caviar Cushion. The short answer is no, I can't read your mind. And doing psychology doesn't really teach you how to read people's mind. Psychology students are not naturally better with people. What is true is that studying psychology can make you more effective, but that's something that you learn over time and with intention. And people from all personality types, some are super introverted, some are social queens and kings, all study psychology. And some study it out of pure curiosity about the human mind, brain, and behavior. Some because of personal experiences, and others, if they're doing a PhD in psychology, are simply not ready to enter the job market, which is not unique to psychology. Second most common response, so you're gonna become a psychologist, or therapist, or psychiatrist. Mask, concealer, probably custard. And I think it's important to make the distinction between medicine, clinical psychology, and a research PhD, which are all very different. So usually when I say I'm doing a PhD in psychology, people ask, so are you gonna become a therapist? And then I'll say, not really, it's not that clinical. I do a bit more cognitive neuroscience, so like brain sciences. And then they'll say, oh, so you're gonna become a neurosurgeon working in the hospital. And then that's when I say, actually, I only do research. I won't be medically or clinically qualified to do either of those. And that's when they say, oh, so you're gonna become a professor. I mean, becoming a professor is one possible outcome, but usually after many years, and only if you stay in academia. And just want to make it clear, if you actually want to become a therapist or psychologist doing the clinical work, seeing patients, trying to solve their mental health problems, digging into their childhood trauma, that does require an undergraduate degree in psychology, but you would need specialized training, which is not a psychology PhD. In the UK, it's actually called the Deacon Psych Doctorate in Clinical Psychology, which is not what I'm doing. I used to use the concealer stick, but this is actually easier to use with my finger. Fentibility number 1. And sometimes people also ask, so do you learn to become a therapist or psychologist? So at undergraduate level, if you're doing a course that's BPS accredited, you won't learn a lot about the clinical specialization. There won't be much therapeutic training because it's supposed to cover a wide range of topics, theories, and you won't actually have time to get the hands-on clinical training. Not even master's level. A master's degree is usually just a preparation for the actual doctorate or PhD. And you won't be on track to becoming qualified until you start Deacon Psych. And in terms of psychiatrist, that's another completely different route. You have to start from a medical degree, and you only specialize after 6 years, I believe. And you'll be qualified to prescribe medicine, etc. So psychology as a degree is much broader than a lot of people think. And a psychology PhD is really focusing on research, which I'll expand a little bit later on, but not clinical practice or medical training. The next one is a fun one, which I hope has become mostly obsolete. That's the stereotype that we usually have some mental health issues ourselves, or that people who study psychology are also kind of crazy or not. Surely people don't really hold this stereotype anymore. It's true that there are higher rates of mental health issues in people studying psychology or related fields, but that's a correlation, not causation, and there are many reasons behind it. Firstly, we are more open to mental health issues. If we're actually affected by any, we would be more open to admit it and talk about it openly without feeling ashamed. So it could be a reporting bias. And as I've said before, many people choose psychology because they are curious. For example, if you were bullied at school, you might be more curious about why do some kids bully others? Or how can you help the bullied kids feel better and reduce the negative impact? Or you're just curious about what's happening in the brain or the body when someone's bullied. You can also be curious about what cultures, what kind of upbringing environments would make people more likely to bully others. So there are many aspects of psychology that someone who studies psychology can be curious about. And there are so many other aspects in psychology other than mental health, psychiatric, neurodevelopmental disorders. So the next one is psychology a female-dominated field? This one is probably true, especially at undergraduate level. But from my personal experience, there's also higher proportion of non-binary LGBTQ+ people. It might be that certain genders do tend to have better empathizing abilities, more likely to want to understand others, or are better at it. But again, once you get into different research areas like computational psychiatry, the gender ratio can be very different. And sadly, as you go up the academic ladder, the proportion of women tends to be smaller and smaller. But it's getting better. I usually only use this lash primer from Etuse because I don't want my lashes to look too chunky or, you know, like spider legs. No, not spider legs. Fly legs. And then after I've curled up the lashes, I do the eyeliner. And I've been using, I think it's Kiss Me brown liquid eyeliner for many years. Because I have oily eyelids, so this one really doesn't smear. So finally, what do I actually do as a PhD student in psychology? So as I've said before, psychology is a very broad subject. There's social, biological, developmental, clinical, cognitive, behavioral branches. So understanding the actual topic, which can be super niche, of the PhD researcher will usually help you understand better what they do. But the general structure of what we do is similar. So it's usually at least 3 years, maximum 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Really depends. 4 years is the average, I would say. So you usually start from some literature review and research planning, since the main thing you do is research. Then you do data collection, which is the main bit that differs across different topics or specializations. You analyze the data and write up your results. So to give you an example, a friend in political/social psychology who's in the same cohort as I am, so we started at around the same time, same uni. So their data collection involved traveling to controversial countries and interviewing people from marginalized groups, and their data analysis involves transcribing the interview scripts, identifying themes from the qualitative data. Whereas for me, with the focus on cognitive neuroscience/experimental psychology, my data collection involves lab experiments where people complete computer tasks or brain scans of EEG data, electroencephalography. And my data analysis is usually more quantitative. I'll do a lot more complicated statistical analyses, data cleaning, pre-processing, and actually a lot of coding to design the experiment program, and also a lot of fixing, calibrating equipment. So it looks very different for the two of us. But towards the end, there's always clear success criteria, more or less, which is to write up your research into papers to be published in peer-reviewed journals, and to finish writing the thesis and defend it in a viva. So to wrap up, as I have hopefully explained to you, psychology PhDs are not just one type of work. It's a collection of different paths, but united by people just curious about humans. So if there's anything else that you're curious about, or any other stereotypes or misconceptions that I haven't mentioned, feel free to leave them in the comments. This is just my first attempt doing this kind of video, but I'm thinking that I might also talk about other useful stuff, such as how do you know whether you should do a PhD? How do you know if it's for you? And how to get full funding in the UK, etc. YSL 04. So yeah, this is the finished look. This is pretty much my all-in makeup, and it's still kind of light because I guess I'm more influenced by East Asian makeup styles like Chinese, Korean, Japanese. So it's a bit lighter and a bit shinier. So yeah, I hope that was useful or fun to watch. Bye! A master's so you're not gonna